All right, off the bench presented by United Dairy Farmers, Chatterbox Sports on YouTube, ESPN 1410 Wing AM in Dayton. Jonathan India, remember him?
Yeah, I do.
I remember
Yeah.
him greatly.
By the way, we don't dislike Jonathan India. I see some people kind of beating him up a little bit in the chat for taking a shot, not in the chat, I'm sorry, but on social media for taking a shot at David Bell. Do you believe his comments were taking a shot at David Bell, just continuing to the word accountability keeps getting brought up, right? Accountability was starting to be mentioned a lot towards the tail end of last year. Like, what is David Bell doing in the clubhouse as far as accountability when this team makes this many errors, when they make this many base running blunders? What kind of accountability is being utilized in that clubhouse? And the one thing that keeps being referenced with Terry Francona is obviously there's going to be a lot of people being held accountable throughout, but I thought Jonathan India being asked about what, his thoughts on the Reds being led by Terry Francona, it just seemed like more digs being taken at David Bell. Do you believe that's the case? Is he taking a shot at David Bell here?
I mean, it's a little bit. The quote, or I guess it's not really even a quote, it's India said in the final days of last season that some of the younger players took advantage of Bell's patience and nurturing personality as a player's manager. And basically he said, I think the quote is, Francona's going to light a fire under him. So, it's certainly a little bit of a shot. If anything, a ricochet shot. It
can't not be. Yeah.
So it's like it is. I mean, if I was David Bell, I wouldn't like that quote. But I imagine there is some truth in it. I imagine like the nonchalant demeanor of David Bell that we all saw at post-game press conferences actually was who David Bell was.
Maybe.
I think that's what I take away from this quote, and I think Jonathan's going to be right. I think that the Reds are going to look a little bit different under Terry Francona. Terry Francona is not going to let that slide. He's not going to just sit back and let the young guys take control of the locker room. And again, that's me putting a little bit of words into Jonathan India. But I don't think that's too far off of what he said. I think young guys were taking advantage of David Bell towards the end of the year, and you saw it.
Yeah, I guess the biggest question is how many times is Jonathan India going to be asked about the Reds this year?
A lot.
When Nick Castellanos left to Philly,
it
it was the story of the offseason. Felt like every time he was given a hit, it was something about the Reds, and we were talking about that the whole time. Is Jonathan India asked about the Reds more if they're good or bad?
See, I think
because I think if they're good, they're asking him, pretty quickly about how the young guys he played with, how they turn it around. If Ellie's as good as we think he's going to be, there'll be some questions about that.
I think bad.
But if they're bad,
I think bad.
Right.
I think they still go to him if it's bad.
I think so too. I think they ask what went wrong, what changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was just gonna say when Castellanos left, it's because they were bad, and it was like, okay, they didn't want to bring you back. They could have definitely used your services. Obviously, I think the big argument about India is we appreciated India, but also knew there was a backlog of talent in the middle infield, and it just didn't make sense to extend him at that time, and he was the odd man out. I think it's slightly different because I think that the Reds were hoping and fingers crossed and like the Joe Mixon thing too. If the Bengals were dominating games, if the Bengals were in the playoffs and sitting atop the division, I don't think we're referencing Joe Mixon once throughout the season. Maybe keeping an eye on, Joe Mixon had a good game, good for him. I think the Joe Mixon narrative started to pick up for the Bengals because they were losing from a statistical standpoint, one of the worst rushing teams in football. So it was just easy to look at his big games for the Texans and say, man, I guess the Bengals could have used that. I think it's like the Castellanos thing. When the Reds were losing, man, they could have used Castellanos. I think if the Reds are winning, I don't think the Jonathan India narrative really is popping up throughout the season as much. But if they're losing, man, they could have used that leadership. They could have used Jonathan India's leadership in that clubhouse. I think that could be a narrative that floats if things don't get off to a good start.
If Matt McLean gets hurt, the Jonathan India clips are going to multiply by 10,000.
Fair. Yep.
Yeah.
That would be bad news.
Yeah, it will. I mean, I just think it's
unless Gavin Lux is Jesus.
He could be. That's what I heard on Twitter, that he was close to it.
We haven't fully resigned ourselves to the chance that Gavin Lux is going to be number one on the next year's NBA Top 100.
He could be. He could be. I'm not going to rule it out. I'm positive Elliott this year. I'm positive. Regarding the Jonathan India thing, no, I think people want their clicks. They want their headlines. There's not a more fun headline to read than a former player bashing former team for being cheap. And today's Major League Baseball, who, by the way, is actively trying to fix all these problems with the money situation and teams being too cheap and not caring at all. So, that's the world we live in Major League Baseball today. And to have another team come out or another player come out and bash a former team about it, That's what people want. That's what people want to read. When Kyle Farmer or Sonny Gray, I forget which one of them, came out and said it when they left Cincinnati, it was like nobody wants to leave. Like nobody wants to leave the Reds. It's just that's how they do business there, and everybody's aware of it.
Yeah, obviously, so he was asked about this, as players are starting to ride for camp. When I reread it, I don't know. I guess it's all in how you want to perceive it and twist it, but he was complimenting the Reds and the hiring of Terry Francona. He says the Tito hiring is huge for them. They needed that. They need that discipline. They need that fire in their ass, is his exact quote. Again, I don't think he was – again, you can maybe technically see how that might have been a shot at David Bell, but overall very complimentary too. It wasn't sour grapes. It didn't seem like there was any hint of animosity towards the Reds for moving on from him. And to be fair, his name was on the – I felt like there was rumors of him being traded for 2 years. I don't think it was a surprise when they finally pulled the trigger on him, to be honest.
No, it wasn't a surprise at all. Not at all.
Not like a Luka thing. Not that he's Luka. I'm just saying, like, Luka was a surprise trade. Jonathan
Some people
India was
in the
not a
city
surprise
act
trade.
like Jonathan India was Luka.
Name them?
Do I have to?
Yeah,
You.
it's fair.
No, say they know who they know who they
They
are.
know who they are.
They know who they are. You know.
The genesis
you know.
of Elliot and I's working relationship.
But
It's about a 45-minute Jonathan India debate.
That's true. That's true. And by the way, I think we're both wrong on it.
I do. I agree.
We're both completely
You're
wrong.
both
in that
very
argument.
wrong. Yeah.
But yeah, listen, if Terry Francona is going to come back to Cincinnati or come to Cincinnati and change the way the culture of the clubhouse in a different way than David Bell did, and it works, great. I'm going to be very, very happy about it.
Reed brings up a good point in the chat that I guess we should ask the question: why is the Reds beat reporter interviewing Royals players?
He's got nothing else to do. There's certainly no Reds he could probably interview.
Yeah, it just seems like a good question.
He said sarcastically.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. If Jay Morrison interviewed Joe Mixon, which that would be a trick because Joe Mixon isn't like Jay Morrison, but I mean, would we be mad at a Bengals reporter for interviewing Joe Mixon? There's a storyline there, but we don't trust the reporter. That's the thing. Like we know, he was trying. He was trying to get some. We trust Jay. The other guy, I don't think he was trying to get a positive quote from India.
Yeah, I think you're searching out negative Reds press from anyone on any team that'll give it to you. Probably works better on the Cubs pod.
As you mentioned, Justin, I mean, Jonathan India was on the trade block for seemingly his entire career in Cincinnati. I'd imagine his fondness with the Cincinnati Reds is a little bit different than, per se, a different former player. Like, I think that's where the line gets a little bit blurred. Like, we're going to go interview a guy who might actually have a significant grudge with the Reds.
And I don't think he got the quote he wanted, to be honest.
No, I don't think so either.
Not. Jonathan India, a leader for the Reds in and out of the Reds clubhouse. How about that?
I mean, we did say trading him, I mean, we're going to lose the leadership factor. What if we didn't? What if he just keeps doing these interviews talking about like how great our young core is and Tito's the best manager and he's still just like the clubhouse leader?
Does he get a ring if the Reds win a World Series because of how nice he was to our young core?
If the Reds win a World Series this year, him and Votto both get rings.
Okay, that's fair.
And Devin Mesoraco for getting us the second pick last year.
Devin Mesoraco. And Luis Castillo.
Of course. Love Luis Castillo.
Castillo gets one. Johnny Cueto gets another
Castillo actually
one.
Gets Noelvi Marte's.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
We just undo it. Whoop. Undo.
Yep. Jay Bruce will get one.
For sure.
Actually, did Jay Bruce won a
he won a division.
Did he win a pennant with Cleveland? Justin? I think Jay Bruce won a pennant in Cleveland. I could be wrong. I'll have to go double check.
That I do not remember. My bad. Hey, question real quick. The Noelvi Marte thing. Did we overblow that the other day that he has not reported to spring training yet when he doesn't have to be there? Do you think that, for instance, if you don't think that's fair. No, I'm not disagreeing with you. I just realized when we did that, I was like, well, technically they don't have to report, but it is telling because they said you can count on your hand the amount of players that I think Jim Day came out. Someone came out with, I think it was Jim Day that came out with this quote that said you can count on your hand the amount of players that did not show up early for camp. And obviously he's one of those. Obviously not a great look. It's kind of like, the voluntary workouts in the offseason for the NFL. Like it's voluntary. You don't have to go, but it's noticeable when you're absent. And that's kind of what this is with Noelvi Marte.
I also think I'd care less if more people weren't there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you asked me to count on my hand the amount of people that should be there early, the first name I'd say is Noelvi Marte. So the fact that he's in the last group and not the first group, I don't know. Obviously, it's not a problem. He doesn't have to be there. If he had to be there and he wasn't there, it'd be a much bigger story. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I'm sure he'll be there when he's supposed to be there. And if he's not, we'll blow it up then and talk about it more then. But just not what I'd like, not what I wanted to see to start this season with a guy with probably the biggest question mark of this year. I mean, obviously there's guys, Reed did his top 5 most important players yesterday. There's a lot of guys that are more important than him to the success of this team immediately. But what he does or doesn't turn into for the long term is pretty crucial for where this Reds team can go with this core, talking about, longevity here. And I think this year's pretty formative for it. So, it's a shame that he's not getting as much practice as possible, using the resources to the most of his ability. Because, if he would have went down to the Dominican League this winter and mashed, it's also a different story. But he continued to struggle and clearly needs, something to change. So we'll see what happens in spring training. We'll see what happens as we near this year. But certainly not the start that I was wanting for Noelvi Marte.
No, not at all. And also, real quick, other Reds news. Reds have announced that they renew all TV announcers except for Annie Sabo. So John Sadak, Chris Welsh, Barry Larkin, Jim Day, Jeff Brantley, Brian Giesenschlag, hopefully I said that right, Sam LeCure, our good friend Sam LeCure, all back for games with FanDuel, whatever it's called, FanDuel Cincinnati, whatever it is. I don't understand. FanDuel Ohio, Bally Sports Ohio, Fox Sports Ohio, FanDuel Cincinnati. All of our broadcasters will be back except for Annie Sabo.